Hi everyone, Amy here with some comments to wrap up everything we did for last week, week 5. This will kind of piggyback on the midweek updates for week 5 that I posted toward the end of last week, or the middle of last week, I should say. If you haven't already, make sure you check out the to-do list for this week. Our discussion for this week is a workshop, so we only have the one discussion going on. Make sure you're responding to someone who hasn't yet gotten feedback from anyone else, as always. I have posted your summary grades and feedback on those, so if you have any questions about the comments you received, please do let me know. I would always welcome the opportunity to discuss those further with you. Also, some questions that I've been getting about the sources for your campaign analysis. I wanted to address those here. So you do just analyze one ad, and then the second source is just to back up your analysis. It's not a comparison contrast. It's not a focus on analyzing two different texts. It's really just analyzing one ad and then using another source to supplement some information to your analysis, just to make it a little bit more in-depth. All right, so let's jump into our discussions from last week. I'll try to hit on the writing prompt and the open discussion. So I'll start with the writing prompt. First of all, I just kind of want to apologize because some of this does require you to have some background knowledge about climate change. I just picked a topic and I found these articles to be very closely tied in terms of point counterpoint, and since that was the kind of goal of the prompts here, I thought that they would work well. But they do require you to have some level of background knowledge about what climate change is, climate change due to global warming, what's contributing to these phenomena, and that kind of thing. So I know several of you were saying things like, we don't even know if climate change is happening, we don't know where any of this information came from or what's causing it, and I just want to kind of clarify some of those ideas. And it's also really interesting to hear from people of your generation, and I'm not trying to assume that everyone in the class is of the same generation, but it seems like more or less most of you are, that nothing needs to be done about climate change, because I would say that this generation is the group of people that's kind of been the most involved in mitigating climate change, and the ones whose children and grandchildren, etc., are going to be affected the most by it. So I'm going to tie this into the article specifically, but just to clear up some of the confusion, I wanted to show you some of the research that Mitchell is referring to and that actually exists regarding this phenomenon of climate change due to global warming. So I went to a just quick Google search and typed in causes of climate change, and these were my results right here. And I decided to go with this first one that popped up because it is from NASA, which seems like a very credible source, and also it is one of the sources that one of the articles, specifically Mitchell's article, referenced. And so I thought this would probably be the most relevant. So I went ahead and clicked on that, and it's definitely got some information about what causes the Earth's temperature to increase, what's causing climate change just in terms of like the physics of it. But I wanted to point out some of the specific information here. So first of all, this very first paragraph says, most climate scientists agree the main cause of the current global warming trend is human expansion of the greenhouse effect, warming that results when the atmosphere traps heat radiating from the Earth towards space. So I do want to emphasize here that most scientists do agree that climate change due to global warming is being caused by increased consumption of things like fossil fuels since the Industrial Revolution, which is causing an increase in greenhouse gases, or the greenhouse effect, what it's saying right here. But because this is not necessarily your most credible type of source, it's not a peer-reviewed scholarly article, I wanted to go ahead and follow this source's sources. And so I clicked on that link, and it took me down here to a couple of them. This looks like another kind of government site. So I went to this one because it does look like a peer-reviewed scholarly article. And so there are a few things here. I did go ahead and read it, and I'm trying to remember where the exact quotes are, but it kind of goes through and reverses some of the misconceptions regarding climate change. Let me see. In its most recent assessment, IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, created in 1988 by the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Environmental Program. In its most recent assessment, it states unequivocally that the consensus of scientific opinion is that Earth's climate is being affected by human activities. Human activities are modifying the concentration of atmospheric constituents that absorb or scatter radiant energy. Most of the observed warming over the last 50 years is likely to have been due to the increase in greenhouse gas corrections. So, and then this group is not alone. There's a lot of more data here that shows that greenhouse gases are accumulating in Earth's atmosphere as a result of human activities. And then just to go back to the original source, I wanted to show where it was addressing human activity specifically, and that does refer back to the IPCC and a little bit more information about them, and they concluded that there's more than 90% probability that human activities over the past 250 years have warmed our planet. So like I was saying, since the Industrial Revolution. And then I know that a lot of you were saying things like, well, the Earth's temperature fluctuates naturally, or it could be due to solar energy, but again, this source kind of goes through and rejects some of those theories and talks about why it's actually true that even though things do fluctuate, the fluctuations that have been observed in the last 250 years, or especially even the last 50 years, seem to be beyond that and caused by humans' consumption of fossil fuels and things like that. So this is what I was talking about in my midweek update when I said that Mitchell's evidence is more credible and specific, and it's easier to follow the trail of his research, whereas Robert's article just kind of says generally, some scientists say, but doesn't really directly reference its sources, whereas Mitchell does directly mention NASA, and I was able to go find the information from them. So keep that in mind as you're doing analysis of the credibility of your sources. It's not necessarily just what sounds good to you, but what actually has the information to back it up. So I did want to pull out some 5 minutes of fame to kind of highlight those of you who were addressing the different parts of the assignment very successfully. I also mentioned in my midweek comment that some of you were struggling to identify the identify the angle of vision and distinguish that from the author's actual thesis. So I thought this one here was a good example of that. This person says, Mitchell has a democratic or liberal environmental point of view. This perspective is coming from a greener point of view about the environmental disaster we live in today. Roberts has a Republican point of view and is expressing a conservative point of view. So I would like to see this go more in depth, but this is actually what I'm looking for when I say, you know, angle of vision isn't about their actual argument. It's about the biases that they bring to the argument that shape the way it gets written. And so, like, especially here where Roberts, this person says Roberts has a more conservative point of view, you can tell that Roberts is much more fiscally conservative, and he's not willing to take on the added expense that would come for example, with a conversion to renewable energy, whereas Mitchell doesn't seem to have that concern, whereas his concern is more, like this person says, green, or more concerned with protecting the environment. So that is not exactly the same as their argument, but it influences their arguments greatly. I also wanted to point out that a lot of the comments I saw that you were providing to one another between Wednesday and Friday were very much, I agree, I disagree, this is my opinion on the issue, which again, you can't really have an opinion on something that's a fact. Climate change due to global warming is a fact, and 90% of scientists agree that it's human caused, so that is very nearly a fact, although not exactly the same as a fact. It's a very well supported opinion that is shared by most scientists. But again, I know you all do have opinions, but when I'm looking for substance in your comments, I'm looking more for you to address the prompts that were given in the original. So for example, if someone had included the author's thesis as the angle of vision, maybe a classmate could jump in and say, you know, I think you're still struggling with what angle of vision really means. Can you talk about these writers' biases or something like that? And if you are going to agree or disagree, you don't just want to restate what the original writers have said, as in I agree with Roberts when he says this, but actually extend the conversation to something beyond what was there in the original. And that's what I think this comment here does very well. Although the climate has changed on Earth before, I don't necessarily agree with your point about the fossil fuels. The fact that we are burning fossil fuels into our atmosphere where we only have a limited amount of fuel is a problem. If all of our machines are run on fossil fuels and we suddenly run out, then what? War. Do all our machines just stop in their tracks and we have stop having factories and cars. We need to be focusing on renewable energy because fossil fuels are a one-time use type thing. Once it's gone, it's gone. So this comment, although it is still agree, disagree, it at least brings in some other information and goes beyond what was said in the original text. And then I know that a lot of you are still struggling with your reflections. Many of you still are not even doing the reflections, which is hurting your grades drastically. And I'm going to point out some areas in the discussion itself where you might be able to achieve those more effectively. But this is one that I thought had some substance and was more what I was looking for. This person says, the first author used a good amount of facts to support his claims, and I really like knowing where the information is coming from. I don't agree with the second article because although there would be more carbon dioxide, it might not be a healthy amount. Too much carbon dioxide is not good either. So this first part speaks to what I was kind of alluding to earlier, where Mitchell's article is more specific, easier to follow the trail of information, and therefore more credible. He has more information and you know where it comes from. So that helps his authority and trustworthiness. But then actually I think the second point really relates to the logic of both of the arguments and how they can be contrasted that way. Because if you think about what Roberts is saying about how the increase in carbon dioxide might actually be a benefit to our atmosphere and our environment, that really doesn't make sense. And so if I was doing an analysis of this, I would stick to what this person is saying here and critique the logic of Roberts' argument and say that his points actually don't really follow one another. They're not actually logical. So, you know, as you're talking about things like pathos, logos, ethos, as you analyze the ads for the essay that you're working on, you can apply those same analysis strategies to any text that you encounter in your everyday reading. Okay, and then just jumping back into the discussion, I did want to show some tips on how you might execute the final comments a little bit more effectively. So for example, in Rocky's thread, Rocky, you did do a final comment, but you actually did it in a reply to my comment on, I think, Thursday. And so the reason I have you all wait until after Friday night to do your final reflections is because the final reflections aren't really meant to just reply to one of the comments. The final reflections are meant to synthesize the entire discussion that's taken place within your thread and reply to all of the comments at once, as well as what you learned from reading other people's work. So if you post on Thursday night, you might receive comments before the comment deadline that you don't take into account in your final reflection because you posted it too soon. So please do wait until after Friday night to post your reflections so you can take into account all of the comments that you received, or at least the ones that came in on time, and kind of synthesize the whole thing rather than just replying individually. Also, a couple of you, Tabitha and David, posted your final reflections in a separate thread, and I almost missed them. So what you would actually want to do is go back to your original thread, post a reply, and put your final reflections there so that you can see it relating back to everything that's come before. And I think I mentioned that in an earlier week as well. Let me just jump into your open discussion too. I only have a couple minutes left to talk here, but I want to point out a couple of things. Again here, for your replies to one another, I think everyone did a good job on their original posts, but in your replies, you want to address the prompt itself and not just what you liked or disliked. So remember that because we only allow 3 original threads, your response to the prompt that you've been given actually comes in your replies to one of those 3 originals. So if you post just something very brief like this, you're not going to be achieving the goal of everything that the assignment was asking you to do. Whereas if you look at Chris's and Luke's examples here, those are much more in-depth in terms of what I'm looking for. The other thing to remember is that you have to post on 3 separate days, not just 3 separate times. I know a lot of you are waiting till Sunday and just posting 3 times on Sunday, and it's reflected in the rubric that that is going to drastically hurt your grades. So if your grades are low, that may be why. And then finally, you actually do not need to do a comment, a final reflection, on your original thread if you posted one, Katie. I saw that you did that down here. Because everybody posts on different days and at different times in the open discussions, it would be very difficult to post a reflection that took into account all of the comments. You'd probably have to wait until midnight on Sunday to do so. So that wouldn't really work. But Katie, you didn't do your reflection on the writing prompt discussion, so make sure that you're not getting those confused. Okay, so if any of these instructions are unclear or if you have any questions about the assignments in general, please do let me know as always. And again, this week is a workshop, so you just have one discussion.